It started with a chainsaw at 6:13 in the morning and a woman in a power-walking tracksuit yelling about aesthetic standards. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the sound hit me like a cattle prod to the soul, followed by the unmistakable buzz of a fence post hitting dirt. I walked outside in my slippers to find Karen Witherspoon, self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, personally supervising the demolition of my ranch fence like she was hosting a ribbon-cutting ceremony at a new strip mall. That was the moment I knew. War had come to the prairie, and it was wearing Lululemon. You don't expect HOA drama when you live on 50 acres of horse property 5 miles from the nearest streetlight. I'd carved out a quiet life, raising goats, growing wildflowers, and fixing tractors older than the HOA's existence. But when a development of modern little beige boxes crept up on the edge of my land, dragging their bylaws and lawn color charts with them, peace became a memory. At the head of this over-manicured army stood Karen, short hair, big sunglasses, and the moral certainty of a televangelist with a microphone. It started small. Notes left in my mailbox about unauthorized structures, aka my barn. A friendly reminder that my gravel driveway needed to be brought up to code. She even suggested I replace my livestock fencing with white vinyl pickets to blend better with the community aesthetic. I ignored her, figuring she'd eventually get tired of barking up a fence post that wasn't hers. Turns out, I underestimated both her free time and her audacity. The morning she cut down my fence, I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. I just stood there, sipping my coffee, watching her crew haul off what I'd hammered in with my own 2 hands. When I confronted her, she handed me a folded paper. Some fake-looking permit with her signature scrawled across the bottom and a barely legible stamp from the HOA. She smiled like she was doing me a favor, told me, "You're welcome. It's going to look so much better now." And then she had the audacity to pat me on the arm like I was her confused uncle at a nursing home. I called the sheriff, thinking surely someone with a badge could shut this circus down. But apparently, Karen's husband had donated to the sheriff's re-election campaign, and all I got was a shrug and a best to settle it civilly. Civilly. Like ripping out my fence wasn't an act of war. She strutted back to her car like she'd just claimed a new province. That's when the idea hit me. Not rage, not revenge exactly, but a kind of mischievous clarity. If Karen didn't want a fence, fine. She wouldn't get one. She'd get something worse. That evening, I walked the length of the ruined fence line with my dog Buck, a flashlight, and a notepad. I made a list. Prickly pear, ocotillo, barrel cactus, cholla. The nastier, the better. I wasn't just going to rebuild a barrier. I was going to plant a botanical hellscape so spiny, so brutal, so undeniably native, that not even a lizard could pass through without asking permission. By the next afternoon, I was on the phone with my Uncle Frank, a retired botanist with an evil streak and a greenhouse full of weaponized flora. When I told him the plan, he laughed so hard he dropped his coffee. He offered me a trailer full of plants and the knowledge to plant them for maximum legal spite. I picked them up that weekend. I didn't even try to hide it. In fact, I drove right past the HOA clubhouse with a trailer full of cacti and a grin on my face that could have split wood. Of course, Karen was watching. She always was. She caught me unloading a 20-gallon cholla, sometimes called jumping cactus because it breaks off and sticks to anything that touches it, and narrowed her eyes like I'd just brought a pack of wolves to the neighborhood. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I was landscaping. Native plants only. Water efficient. Very sustainable. She smiled, but her eyes were already calculating the loopholes she'd need to shut me down. Too bad I'd already checked the local zoning laws. Native plants couldn't be restricted. Cactus counted as natural fencing under the agricultural clause. And if the wall happened to be a few feet thick and 6 feet tall, well, that was just to ensure deer didn't wander in. Safety first. Every evening that week, I planted. Friends dropped by to help. One brought beer, another brought a wheelbarrow full of volcanic rock to line the base. It was backbreaking work, The cholla bit me 3 times. I bled, swore, and kept going. By the end of the 5th day, the border of my ranch looked like the kind of place you'd need a medic to escape from. It wasn't pretty. It was magnificent. Karen hosted a garden club brunch the next day. She positioned the buffet right where my fence used to be, probably thinking she'd show off her HOA's progress to her fellow Stepford generals. She set up a floral arch, passed around mimosas, and started talking about beautification initiatives. Then someone noticed the cactus wall. The brunch went quiet. One of the guests asked if it was a sculpture. Another tripped on a rock and nearly face-planted into a prickly pear. Karen's face turned a shade of red that no lipstick could fix. She marched over that afternoon, tried to tell me it was a safety hazard. I handed her a laminated printout of the zoning code and smiled like I was selling Girl Scout cookies. She said, "This isn't over." I said, "Sure ain't." What she didn't know was that the cactus wall was just the beginning. Because sometimes the best way to win a war isn't with bullets or lawsuit. It's with patience. And about 300 pounds of strategically placed thorns. The wall stood like a spiny fortress, gleaming under the sun with its cruel beauty. Even the wind seemed to respect it, whistling low and slow as it curled around the sharp edges of ocotillo and barrel cactus. It wasn't just a wall anymore, it was a statement. And Karen? Karen was losing her mind over it. The first incident came less than 24 hours after I finished planting. A photographer, probably one of Karen's friends from the HOA newsletter, showed up and tried to stage a photo shoot along the road facing my property. She was setting up pastel balloons, and some poor teenager in a tulle dress was doing her best to look serene next to what she probably thought was desert art. Then came the scream. Apparently, the girl had backed into a cholla and now had 3-inch needles lodged in the back of her thigh. The photographer tried to yank them out and only succeeded in getting stuck herself. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, sipping sweet tea, watching them stagger toward their SUV like they'd been in a porcupine brawl. Karen showed up 5 minutes later, took one look at them, and spun around like a malfunctioning Roomba. She didn't even look in my direction. The next morning, I found a note duct-taped to my gate. "Your wall presents a public safety hazard. Remove it immediately or face legal consequences." Signed, of course, by Karen Witherspoon, president of the Harmony Hills Homeowners Association. I snorted so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. I didn't respond. I just walked out, turned on my little solar garden lights all along the base of the wall, and added a fresh sign that read, "Survival of the fittest begins here." Karen didn't take that well. 2 days later, animal control showed up at my front gate with a clipboard and serious expressions. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint about animal neglect, excessive noise, and potential hoarding. I showed them around the ranch. My goats were fat, happy, and wore seasonal bandanas. The chickens had their own hand-painted coop. My dog Buck had more square footage in his kennel than most studio apartments. The officers were apologetic, especially after I offered them lemonade and let them feed carrots to my horse Lawsuit, who promptly nuzzled them like a politician at a baby-kissing convention. As they were leaving, one of the officers gave me a funny look and asked if my neighbor was always so detail-oriented. I told him Karen once tried to report me for having an off-brand mailbox flag. He laughed and shook his head, muttering something about getting hazard pay for dealing with suburbia spillover. I waved them off, turned back toward the house, and spotted Karen across the road, peeking out from behind a magnolia tree like she was auditioning for a spy thriller. Later that week, I picked up the HOA newsletter from the Community Center Bulletin Board, purely for entertainment purposes. Sure enough, Karen had written a column titled, "Protecting Our Neighborhood Aesthetic," complete with a blurry zoomed-in photo of my cactus wall and some thinly veiled jabs about property value threats. She even managed to squeeze in a sentence about desert plants attracting vermin and snakes. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't have to. That night, I added little garden gnomes to the wall, except I painted each one holding a tiny, HOA violation clipboard and named them after board members. By now, my cactus wall had developed a fan base. People started stopping by to take pictures. One guy asked if he could propose to his girlfriend in front of it. A local artist offered to paint a mural on the backside, something about freedom and native resilience. Karen looked like she was going to chew through her steering wheel every time she drove by. But she wasn't done. Oh no, Karen had one more trick up her sleeve. I woke up one morning to find half the solar lights on the wall smashed. At first I thought it was a random act of vandalism, until I checked the footage from the trail cams I'd hidden in the rocks nearby. There she was, 11:42 p.m., dressed in black workout gear, tiptoeing along the cactus line with a garden hoe and a flashlight. She swung like she was battling demons, then yelped when she backed into a prickly pear. She staggered back to her car, clutching her elbow and swearing so loud I could hear it through the footage. I printed out stills from the video and mailed them anonymously to the HOA board with a note that read, "Concerned about recent nocturnal trespassing incidents. Possibly raccoons. Very large, angry raccoons." I never heard back, but the next time I saw Karen, she had a bandage on her arm and refused to make eye contact. Since she couldn't destroy the wall, she tried a new approach: passive-aggressive beautification. She installed a rose trellis directly across from the cactus wall and hung wind chimes shaped like butterflies. It looked like a dollar store had exploded. She even hired a landscaper to shape her hedges into swans. Unfortunately for her, the swans melted under the sun and began looking like deflated balloons by day 3. The juxtaposition of my brutal, spiky fortress and her sagging hedges was unintentionally hilarious. To make matters worse for Karen, my wall was blooming. Desert blooms, short and glorious, burst out like tiny explosions of rebellion. Bees showed up. Butterflies. Even a hummingbird that tried to fight its own reflection in one of the solar lights. Kids from the neighborhood rode their bikes out to the end of the road just to stare at it. One kid asked me if it was a fort for nature warriors. I told him it was a fortress against foolishness. Still, I wasn't getting cocky. I knew Karen wasn't done. She was too stubborn, too prideful, too HOA. She would push again. Try something bigger. Maybe legal. Maybe something even stupider. But I was ready. I had my cameras, my friends, my uncle's botanical advice, and a horse named Lawsuit who'd been waiting for his moment to shine. This wasn't just a battle about property lines anymore. This was about boundaries of all kinds, the ones you set with neighbors, the ones you defend with dignity, and sometimes the ones you line with a few 100 pounds of cactus and just a pinch of revenge. It all escalated the morning Lawsuit earned his name. The air was already thick with heat by 9 a.m., and I was feeding the chickens when I heard the unmistakable creak of my front gate opening. Buck barked once from the porch, then lay back down, too hot to care. But I knew something was off. No one used that gate without knocking first. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked up the hill toward the cactus wall just in time to see Karen Witherspoon, sun visor and all, stepping over a flattened piece of fencing she had apparently dragged into the ditch. In one hand, she held a pair of pruning shears. In the other, a laminated folder labeled Emergency Maintenance Order. She was talking to herself as she snipped at a low branch of ocotillo, muttering about property values and invasive species, completely ignoring the "No Trespassing" sign right in front of her. It was the most committed I'd seen her to physical labor since the HOA car wash fundraiser 2 years ago, where she only lifted a sponge long enough for a photo op. Before I could shout, "Lawsuit," my big chestnut gelding with a sense of timing that bordered on divine, came trotting up from the back pasture. He stopped dead when he saw her, ears pinned, eyes narrowed. Karen, oblivious, turned around to admire her damage, and then Lawsuit let out the loudest, most guttural whinny I'd ever heard. Karen jumped like she'd been struck by lightning and took off running, swinging the shears like a weapon as Lawsuit galloped after her, not to trample but to menace. He chased her all the way to the edge of the wall, then stopped dead as she scrambled into her SUV and locked the doors, breathing like she'd just run a marathon. I stood there, half laughing, half furious, as she backed out in a cloud of gravel. The next day, I got a letter, this one certified, accusing me of harboring a dangerous and aggressive livestock animal. She said she was traumatized, might have sprained her wrist, and would be discussing potential legal action with her personal counsel. She ended the letter with the words, "You haven't heard the last of this." Turns out, she was half right. She did take me to court, filed a formal complaint with the county, citing emotional distress, malicious landscaping, and intimidation by farm animals. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could, because this was Karen, but even for her, this was next-level absurd. I dug up the wildlife cam footage again, this time with crystal-clear clips of her stepping onto my land, cutting at my cactus, and getting spooked by my horse who never even touched her. I added some stills of her nighttime vandalism spree for good measure. My attorney, an old college roommate named April, who once got a city councilman's entire backyard pool declared illegal due to a zoning technicality, took one look at the case and grinned. She said, "This is going to be fun," and showed up to court wearing a BOLO tie and boots. Karen, on the other hand, arrived in a cream blazer with shoulder pads wide enough to catch satellite signals and a facial expression that implied she smelled something foul and couldn't find where it was coming from. The courtroom was small, quiet, and painfully humid. Karen's lawyer, a stiff man with a comb-over that had lost the war against time, tried to argue that I had created a hostile environment with my choice of landscaping and animals. He even pulled out a printed version of Karen's HOA newsletter article as evidence of community concern. April objected, pointing out that Karen had written the article herself. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked Karen if that was true. She confirmed, but said she had community input. When pressed, she named her neighbor Sharon, who was sitting in the back row scrolling through her phone and very loudly whispered, "I never said that," to no one in particular. Then it was our turn. April queued up the footage on a screen the bailiff had to plug in twice before it worked. It started with Karen stepping over the gate. Clip 2, her chopping at the cactus. Clip 3, the infamous midnight mission. Clip 4 was a slow-motion replay of lawsuit galloping toward her with the background music April had added just for flair. Ride of the Valkyries. Karen's mouth dropped open. The courtroom snorted. Even the judge cracked a smile before telling April to mute the audio. The point was made. By the end of it, Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to slide under the table. The judge ruled in our favor in under 10 minutes, dismissed all of Karen's complaints, and scolded her for trespassing and damaging property. He even added that she should consider herself lucky we weren't pressing charges. I thought that was the end of it, but April wasn't done. She filed a counterclaim for the cost of the original fence Karen had cut down, the replacement cactus wall, and legal fees. The HOA, caught off guard, tried to backpedal, claiming they had no knowledge of Karen's independent decisions. But I had copies of the so-called permit she'd handed me, the one with the HOA stamp and her signature. The judge saw right through it. The final blow came 2 weeks later when we won the countersuit. Karen was ordered to pay for the damages out of pocket. The HOA board was fined for negligence and false representation. The court costs alone made their next community garage sale look like a charity plea. Karen stopped leaving her house for 3 days. The next time she did, she wore sunglasses the size of dinner plates and a scarf like she was shielding herself from shame. But if Karen thought her troubles were over, she was mistaken. Because while she was busy digging her own legal grave, something else was happening. The story had leaked, first locally, then online. Someone at the courtroom had taken a short clip of lawsuit in the courtroom video, galloping at the camera, and uploaded it with the caption, "When you mess with the wrong rancher." It exploded. People loved it. I got interview requests. A gardening blog reached out asking to feature my cactus wall. A small manufacturer even offered to sponsor my ranch's social media page, which I had to create just to keep up with the comments. Karen had tried to destroy me with HOA politics, but instead, she'd launched me into local celebrity status and made my cactus wall the most beloved landscaping feature in the entire county. Kids called it the Great Thorn Wall. One local artist started sketching cartoon versions of Lawsuit in a superhero cape. Tourists began driving out just to see it. Karen, meanwhile, found herself frozen out of her own board meetings, because the rest of the HOA was sick of the backlash. Harmony Hills wasn't so harmonious anymore, and we were just getting started. By the time summer hit full force, Karen was a shell of her former HOA tyrant self. Her grand speeches at the monthly board meetings had dwindled into passive-aggressive mumbling. Her infamous clipboard hadn't been seen in public for weeks. Every time someone mentioned the cactus wall, or even hinted at desert landscaping, she flinched like someone had threatened her with a rake. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was done. I was wrong. Rumor had it Karen was selling her house. Quietly, of course. Couldn't let the neighbors think she was fleeing defeat. But real estate agents had been spotted walking the perimeter of her yard, most of them looking like they'd stepped on something sticky. One even stopped by my place to ask about the legality of the wall, to which I handed him a highlighted copy of the zoning law and a business card that simply read, "Talk to the Cactus." He left without asking for a tour. A week later, flyers appeared in the neighborhood for Karen's farewell garden soiree, scheduled for Saturday evening. A catered event with live music and lightly curated conversation, it was supposed to be her graceful swan song, her last opportunity to spin the story before she disappeared into HOA obscurity. I figured I'd stay far away, pour a whiskey, and enjoy the silence while it lasted. But around sunset, as the sky turned molten orange and the cicadas started up, I noticed something strange. A car parked along the edge of my property. Then another. Then two more. A quick glance through my binoculars showed a few of the party guests wandering over toward the cactus wall with their drinks, pointing and giggling. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but judging from the camera flashes and one woman's gleeful miming of Karen being chased by Lawsuit, the mood was not exactly reverent. Then I saw her. Karen, standing just a few feet from the wall, dressed in a pastel jumpsuit that probably cost more than my pickup. Her hands were balled into fists. She was staring at the wall like it had personally insulted her mother. And then, in the flickering glow of the solar lights, she pulled something from her bag. Hedge clippers. Shiny, heavy-duty ones. I dropped my glass. No way. Not again. She glanced over her shoulder, made sure no one was watching. Except me, of course, because Karen had somehow never learned about wildlife cams or long-range lenses, and stepped into the narrow space between her property and the cactus wall. The solar lights buzzed faintly as she raised the clippers and began snipping at a branch of prickly pear like it owed her money. What she didn't know, what made my jaw drop in absolute disbelief, was that one of the barrel cacti near that section had recently become the cozy home of a hornet nest. Not just any hornets. Angry, territorial, revenge-seeking country hornet. I'd left it alone when I noticed, figuring nature would take care of any future trespassers far better than I ever could. Karen got 3 snips in before she hit it. There was a sharp buzz like a wire snapping, then a shriek, and then absolute chaos. From my porch, I could only see part of it, but it was enough. Karen screaming, flailing, running straight through a cluster of ocotillo and into a cholla that wrapped around her leg like it was personally offended. She slapped at her hair, which seemed to be moving on its own, and tripped, falling face first into a pile of decorative gravel. People from the party came running, one of them screaming, "Oh my God, she's under attack!" Another tried to spray her with the garden hose, which did nothing except make her mascara run like a horror movie villain. I ran down to the fence line with my phone, dialing 911 more out of obligation than concern. The hornets had mostly dispersed by the time the EMTs showed up, but Karen was a mess. Red-faced, covered in welts, one leg stuck with cholla spines, her carefully pressed jumpsuit now shredded in places I won't describe. As they loaded her into the ambulance, one of the paramedics turned to me and asked if I'd seen what happened. I nodded and said, with as much country innocence as I could muster, "Guess them plants didn't like being trimmed." He raised an eyebrow, then chuckled and said, "Nature's security system." Karen was treated and released the next day, but the video of her hornet sprint went viral before she even made it home. Someone at the party had captured the whole thing and uploaded it with the caption, "When HOA goes too far." By Monday, it had 500,000 views. Someone added dramatic music. Someone else edited in fake hornet dialogue. I heard a local brewery even named a new IPA after it, Sting Operation. Karen officially resigned from the HOA 3 days later. No announcement, no statement. Just a notice taped to the community bulletin board and a for sale sign in her yard that had the words, "Motivated Seller," in bold red letters. Nobody cried. Nobody threw her a second farewell party. The wall, meanwhile, stood taller than ever. A local metalworker offered to install a small bronze plaque for free, which we set right at the center of the wall. It read, "In memory of the great HOA battle. May all future meddlers tread lightly." A few months later, the county awarded me a small grant for innovative drought-resistant property protection. I used it to expand the Cactus wall another 50 feet in both directions and added motion sensor lights just for fun. Visitors still come out to see it. People pose with the gnomes. Kids dare each other to touch the spikes. I added a little donation box next to a sign that reads, "Karen's Wall of Consequences." The proceeds go to a local animal rescue, where Lawsuit now volunteers as a therapy horse, believe it or not. As for me, I finally got my peace back. The chickens are laying. The goats are thriving. And Buck lounges on the porch every morning like a king surveying his spiny kingdom. I sip my coffee, watch the sun rise behind that glorious wall, and sometimes think about Karen, wherever she ended up, probably terrorizing some poor condo board in Florida. But every so often, when the wind picks up and rustles the ocotillo just right, I swear I can still hear it. The faint hum of hornets, the sound of clippers hitting gravel. And one HOA Karen learning, at last, that not everything can be trimmed to fit her vision. Some things bite back, and some things sting.